Hello, Jeffrey. Can you hear me?
Very, very well. Yes.
Okay.
How are you?
Okay. How are you?
I'm good.
So
Wonderful to be here.
it's wonderful to have you. And let me start by saying this is Legal Minutes, and I'm presenting a series on the triumph of the human spirit, which you really you are a poster person for this series because of how you have triumphed despite all your obstacles. And, I've been out there in the field and I've been fighting for people like you and children and families and others. No one told me when we went to law school that Mama never told me there'd be days like this. And I wrote the book, The Unchecked Power Guide, because I wrote it with blood, sweat, and tears, right? You can relate to that in a different
Abs-
way.
Absolutely. Yes.
and um, and I did it because I had to, because we have to expose the problems and try and fix the problems, no matter how big the problems are. And I want to tell you, when I went through, fighting corruption, fighting for people within the court system, there's a lot of power there. There's a lot of backlash. And my kids used to call me Batman. So, and my son used to send me Mother's Day cards. And I'm going to read this to you. It's from Rocky Balboa. This is what he sent me. And I'm sure you can relate to this, and we all can in some ways. So let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life, but it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. I'll just keep it there for now, but I actually was very moved by that quote because it really represents life. And anytime my children complained, I bought a very big poster of it, put it in the kitchen. I said, read that. All complaints go there. So now, getting to you, my friend, I'm so happy that you are on this program. You are such a special, special person. And we're going to go through your life and how the court system failed you. Even a Supreme Court justice, I don't know how she made it there. And a very well-known DA, both failed you despite their responsibilities. But we won't go there yet. We're going to start out with your life. And you were a beautiful young man. And you were just 17. There you are, right? There you
Yes.
are, just 17. And that is your mom, right?
Yes.
And then what happens is, so take us through that picture when you were just 17. Who was Jeffrey Deskovic before you were completely traumatized and your life was derailed? Who were you?
Sure. So growing up, and this was before I was 16, because I was arrested when I was 16, and then I got bailed out, and I turned 17, and that's shortly before the trial. So at 16, before I was arrested, I think I was kind of like an all-American kid. I mean, I lived in an apartment complex in the city of Peekskill. It was the suburbs. It was middle class. It was that ethnically diverse. And I was kind of the life of the party. I was very athletic, and pretty much whatever I would suggest would be what everybody would do. There were a lot of kids in that apartment complex in the nearby area. So we might play basketball, we might play stickball, might go swimming, we might go play Monopoly, we might go play video games. We even invented a bunch of other games. Um, so I did all of that, but I didn't play organized sports, but that was after school. But in school, where the kids were a little bit older than me, because I had skipped a grade when I was much younger. So I really wasn't into what they were into. So, I was not into like drinking, parties, chasing girls. So, and I certainly wasn't playing organized sports. So that made me seem strange to the kids in the high school. I didn't quite fit in.
Okay. And that was your mom. You had a close relationship with your mom, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. And you were going to a high school, right?
Yes. Yes. I
So
was going to
then
Peekskill High School. Hmm.
Peekskill High School. And so take me through, there was a terrible tragedy in your high school, right? And
Yes.
a young lady that you were classmates with. Did you know her?
No, I mean it depends really what you mean by the word no. She was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was the extent of it. We were not even on a high buy basis.
Okay. So what happens? You heard you're going to school, and then you get the news that your classmate has been raped and murdered. Can you tell me? Do you remember learning about that?
I do. Yes, I do. So I remember when she went missing November 15th, 1989. I remember that because there was an announcement made in the PA system, that she was missing. There was a newspaper article saying, teen missing with a picture of her. And then on the 17th, there was another picture of her saying teen found, had a picture of her face, and, and it just a teen body found, and had a picture of her and a picture of the map. And it mentioned that, she had been found murdered and, naked from the waist down.
Terrible. And so what happens then? I mean, you're obviously upset. I mean, you know that as a classmate, but you weren't really friendly with her. You had nothing to do. You weren't in her group of contacts, really. So what happens after? How long after she was murdered um, do you start to get involved and this story starts to unravel?
A few weeks after that, somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks. So the police interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of the kids told the police that they might want to speak to me because I didn't quite fit in. So that's how I got on the police radar. I was a sensitive teen, and this was my real first brush with death, so I was emotional. And the police thought it was suspicious that I would be emotional over the death of somebody that I barely knew. Then again, murders were very rare in Peekskill, and this really shook everybody up to the point that there was free mental health services set up all throughout the city of Peekskill to help people process what had happened. But in addition, the police got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator. And I had the misfortune of matching those characteristics. So it was a type of reinforcing factor.
Can you go into that? How did they determine their psychological profile? And how is it that you fit it? And how did they know that you, out of all the other students and people and possible suspects, fit that profile?
Well, I'm not really clear how they put the profile together, but they said that it was probably somebody who knew her, most likely a classmate, somebody who was a loner. And really, that description, as you're kind of hinting at, it could have fit anybody. But I think it was that the police had already been, that the other kids in the school had already suggested to the police they look at me, and then when they got that and they could apply it to me, that I think that was, what was kind of reinforcing.
Wow. Why do you think other kids in your class or your school said, hey, look at Jeffrey Deskovic?
Because unlike my life after school, where I was kind of the life of the party, I was really quiet and withdrawn, and I was kind of on the fringes of the society in the high school.
Why
And I
is
and I
that?
think and I think that I think that their thinking was that people that are quiet and loners commit heinous crimes. I guess that's probably what the theory was.
But why is it that you felt more comfortable outside of school than with the classmates in school? Why do you think you stayed to yourself when you were in school?
Because I knew the kids after school. I grew up with them from, many years from, second grade forward. We were more in the same age range as well. And so we shared more of the same, more of the same hobbies, and interests.
So you didn't really get to know the people. You weren't in that high school long. What year were you in?
I was in my sophomore year.
In sophomore year. So you didn't really know a lot of the kids from grade school or middle school. This was
Cor-
new for you, and
Correct.
and so you didn't really, and they probably knew each other and had cliques, and so you
Yes,
probably were like a sore thumb, right?
exactly. Yes, you got
So
it. You got it.
what do you think about this first of all, we don't even know if it's true. I mean, they could have said that you fit the profile just to try and induce you to confess, right? And we don't know if it's true that you did fit a profile.
Well, I mean, well, I know that somebody from the NYPD did put the profile together because not to fast forward, but at some point that profile had reached out to my civil rights lawyers and wanted to interview me, identifying himself as the author of that psychological report. So I know that the report was done.
Okay, and what do you think about now that you are an expert? We're going to go fast forward, but we're going to go back. But now, looking back as being an expert within this field, what do you think about that psychological profile where they think loners are more likely to commit these heinous crimes versus, non-loners? I understood that most crimes are committed by somebody that you know and are not committed by necessarily loners, but people you actually are in relationships with.
Yeah, that's exactly correct when you look at the statistics, and that's what findings are made. Yeah, you're right, but I think it's just as a junk science, and sometimes it can have a tragic circumstance, and it can you know throw the focus of an investigation totally off, sometimes with deadly consequences.
So what happens? I mean, you are a baby. In my opinion, you were a baby, 17, I think even 20, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dating myself, but that's a baby. I mean, I have sons, that's very young. I mean, what do you know about life or anything? You have these men in uniform, policemen, and, you know, and this is not about denigrating policemen or anybody. This is just about what you've experienced and how things can go wrong sometimes, no matter, with the court system, with police, and ways to correct it. But so now you're 17, you're a nice, wholesome kid. And what happens? They come over to you, they say, you're a person of interest. I mean, I would fall down. I wouldn't know what the hell to do.
Yeah, so I was 16, and I was 16, and I
16,
was right.
right.
I was right, and
Sorry.
it's okay. So I lived
You're
my
very forgiving.
sure, of course. So I lived across the street from the high school. I just had to walk up a little bit of a hill. So on my way up to school, it wasn't hard to figure out which route I would take on the way to school. The only other way I could have gotten there would have really taken me out of my way. So halfway up the hill, right across, right going up this hill that's adjacent to the high school, these two officers, they're in plain clothes, and they come out of the car and they call my name out. Now I was kind of startled, and they tell me that they want to talk to me about the Correa murder, and I tell them I don't know anything about it, and they tell me that they want me to come down to the police station to that I could help them. And I said, well, I don't know anything about the crime, so I don't see how I could be helpful, but they insisted, and eventually I agreed to go to the police station.
Well, what was your mom saying? Didn't you're getting these calls and they want to discuss a murder? What's your mom saying? What's your family saying?
Well, my mother didn't know. I mean, it wasn't a phone call. They stopped me on the street, but
Right.
she didn't know. If you're 16
And you
years
had
old,
no
then
cell
you're
phones back then
no,
or email. So they stopped you on the street. But then when you obviously, did you not tell your mom as this was unfolding, or
no,
you didn't tell her?
no. I didn't tell her as it was unfolding. I told her
Wow.
later. So at the police station, I mean, the interrogation took on the dynamic that
So hold on
is.
a second. I'm
But
sorry. I just want to clarify. They stop you on your way to school. You're
yes,
alone. You're 16. and you just say, okay, I'm going to go. You didn't say, oh, obviously you didn't know to say, I need a lawyer. I want to call my mom. I want to, get out of this situation so that I could not feel overpowered by this authority and go with them. But instead you submitted and you went down to the police station. They bring you into the police station. You're surrounded by, tell me the atmosphere and how it unfolded.
Yeah, so they bring me into the police station. They bring me into this interrogation room. I didn't realize it was an interrogation room. I didn't have the words interrogation room on it, but I realized in hindsight that that's exactly what it was. But they bring me into this interrogation room, and there's two police officers. There's two detectives. There's the ones that had stopped me, and they have a manila envelope there with a bunch of crime scene photos, and they start questioning me. And they're asking me accusatory type of questions, and they kept that up for quite a long time. I mean,
can you give me an example of any questions if you remember?
Yeah, they asked me if I killed her, and they asked me they accused.
Wait, they asked you, hey Jeffrey, did you kill her?
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't the first thing they asked me, but that was a question that they asked me, and they
how did you
repeated
answer
that.
these questions if you
I
remember?
said, yeah, I was taken aback, and I emphatically said no. I mean, I couldn't really believe that I was even being asked that.
Right. So how long did this interrogation continue?
For approximately 4.5 to 5 hours.
So you're sitting there. How did it begin? Did they try and befriend you? Did they try and how did it begin?
Well, they started out in an aggressive interrogation, and at some point after that, I wanted to leave. I finally got some courage up after a couple hours to leave, and that's when they told me, well, what's it going to look like if you storm out of here? And then there was another detective who had really been quiet to that point, and so he suddenly came to life, and he's pretending to be my friend. And so then they switched.
Good cop, bad cop, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And that's when he starts telling me that, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. And they told me they would ask me opinion questions, and they would congratulate me that my opinions were correct. And that dynamic happened.
Like what? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, they asked me what type of. They said her keychain was missing, and they asked me, what kind of keychain was it? And so I made a guess. I mean, at that time, the rock band New Kids on the Block was very popular. So I said, well, maybe it was New Kids on the Block, or maybe it was a I Love New York type of keychain. And they congratulated me that yes, I was correct.
Wow. Okay, go ahead. Take us through this. We're there with you. We're sitting in that interrogation room with 16-year-old Jeffrey Deskovic. Go ahead.
So they continue on with this junior detective helper theme, which had an appeal to me because prior to my being a teenager.
Wait a second. Junior detective helper theme. It was an act. They wanted to make you feel as though you were part of their police work, and you were a young boy and you were happy to sign on to help them with this police work.
Correct.
They fooled you.
Yes, they did.
Okay. And you were happy to do that because
I wanted to be a cop when I grew up, because I mean, the idea of helping to solve a crime had some appeal to me, and yeah, I mean, those were the reasons. And, but also, I mean, the good cop had appeal to me also as a warm adult, as a father figure. My father was never involved in my life in any way. I never met him until like many years later, once I was an adult. So that was another aspect of it.
Right. Okay, go ahead. So you're being interrogated, and there's a good cop, bad cop situation. They have you as part of, believing that you're helping them uncover the real murderer for this young woman. And how does it go from there?
And then they switched it up and started talking to me as a suspect again. And then they switched it back. And, eventually the thing ended and they let me leave the police station. So I told my mother, afterwards, what happened. And she told me that she didn't want me to speak to the police anymore. And so after that, I avoided them. But then the police reached out to me through a friend. They knew who my best friend was in school. So they had to arrange for the best friend to call me up and tell me that the police wanted to speak with me. And so that was how I got involved with them again. And there was a lot of interactions with them from that point forward over the next 6 weeks, in which half the time they talked to me as a suspect. And then when they push too hard and I become afraid and want to get out of there, that's when this junior detective helper theme continues. And eventually they got me to agree to take a polygraph test by telling me that there was some new information that had come into the police file and they wanted to share that with me, but that I would have to take and pass a polygraph first. And so on that false pretense, I agreed to take the polygraph.
Okay. So how'd that go?
Well, the next day, instead of going to the high school, I went to the police station where I expected the test would happen. And instead of giving me the test there, they drove me out of county 40 minutes away by car to a location where I didn't know where I was going. They put me in the vehicle with the good cop. The other cops were in a different vehicle. So that was done to try to, continue to make me feel comforted in this false way. And they drove me to Brewster. The polygraphist was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he was dressed like a civilian and he never identified himself as a cop. He never read me my rights. I did not have an attorney present. I wasn't given anything to eat while I was there. My mother and grandmother thought I was in school. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but then it had big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I figured, since I'm there to help the police, what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. And from there, they put me in a small room and the polygraphist gave me countless cups of coffee. Seems pretty clear he did that to get me nervous. And then
Can I just ask you a question? You didn't listen to your mom. This came through your best friend. It sounds like you were a young man who wanted to feel important, wanted to be part of something bigger. And they really got you on that. And you were, really buying into that kind of fantasy that they were doing, right?
fair to say, yes.
Right. And then they want to do a polygraph test. And what did you think of that? You thought it was, you weren't concerned. You didn't say, "Hey, mom, this is what they want me to do," or, did you tell your friends? To go even at 16 with police and have, be hooked up to a machine to see if you're lying. What was going through your head?
Well, a number of things. So firstly, I didn't say anything to my mother because I knew that my mother didn't want me to talk to them anyway. But, that was at an age where kids think we know better than our parents. And
Yeah.
it's the cops. They're there to help us. I didn't do anything wrong. So I really don't understand what the purpose of your concern is. What can possibly go wrong? What can possibly happen? But I did go to the police station with that best friend that the cops had reached out through. But when we both got to the police station, the lieutenant, yelled at my best friend and told him to get out of there, and he left. And I decided to just go ahead and do the polygraph.
Okay, so now you go. They load you up with coffee and sugar, probably in the coffee, and you're like,
Yes.
I know how that is. After
Yes.
2 cups, I'm done. You can have, I'll fail every polygraph test after 2 cups. For me, I have a low tolerance, but you're a kid. And I've actually seen that done with little children. Give them Coke at midnight, make them kids who have been abused, and then say, discount their credibility because they're having a tantrum. I've seen that with a 4-year-old. That's another story, but it's quite all these little tactics, are very disturbing, and it impacts people's lives. And you're not really getting at the truth. What you're doing is you're creating a scenario of, someone's reactions to the stimulus you're presenting and the fear. And that creates a lot of problems. So they never told you, maybe you should get a lawyer, nothing. Even this good cop never said that. It was just a game to basically entrap you. So you're here, you're taking this polygraph test. What are the questions he asks you? First, he asks you benign questions, right? Your name, your address.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And then his hands are on the knobs of the machine, and he's pretending to tune the machine into my body's biofeedback. And then he tells me that 1 in 10 people can't be polygraphed, but after fiddling with the knobs, he then tells me that I'm not one of them. I'm not one of the 10 that can't be polygraphed.
Right.
And then he launches into his third-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He kept raising his voice at me, and he kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. And I want to point out, I was not used to talking to adult males. Certainly not anybody who was, as he was kind of a mountain of a man. So it was a very scaring thing. And each hour that passes by, my fear increases in proportion to the time.
Okay, so go ahead. So what happens?
So eventually, I guess he was exasperated, and he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And that's when the good cop comes in the room, and he told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off, but could not do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he said, "Look, just tell them what they want to hear. They'll stop what they're doing. You could go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested." So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, just being concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else knew where I was either loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. And, then there's a possibility of harm, and he's throwing me this false life preserver. So I decided to make up a story based upon the information they gave me in the interrogation that day and in the 6 weeks run up to it. By the time everything was said and done, I collapsed onto the floor in a fetal position, and I was crying uncontrollably.
That is, can you just, that is just very disturbing on how that happened. So you're brought to your knees. You're basically, can you just go back just a few minutes with it and just slowly, right before you're brought to your knees, crying uncontrollably, just because people can't imagine what it's like. And, when people are said to confess and whatnot, they don't understand all the things that are going into the person's mind and how could anyone, most people don't understand, how could anyone ever confess to something that they didn't do? They just don't understand that. Can you kind of go back slowly and just explain that part and how you got there? And
Because I didn't see any other way out. I just wanted them to stop. I just wanted to get out of there. And this one friendly face out of everybody is telling me the way that I can get out. Just make up the story. I mean, the fact that he's telling me just tell them what they want to hear, and that I'm not going to be arrested. I mean, communicated to me that they would know that this is not they would know it's a lie. They would know it's a false confession. So those things were I just wanted to make them stop and get out of there.
How long was it going on at that point?
6.5 to 7 hours.
Okay.
But I spoke faster than what I could make the story up. And that added to being overwhelmed. And that was really what triggered me to just collapse on the floor.
So you collapse on the floor, and then what happens?
So I start crying uncontrollably. The good cop sits down on the chair, and he starts patting my head like you might pet a dog. And then the lieutenant bursts into the room, yelling, that for me to repeat what I just said, that he had to hear it, and that we could be there all night if I wanted to be. And so I had to
Let me
repeat
let
everything.
me ask you something. What was your confession? I mean, at the time, what did you say that you did? Was it specific, or did you just say, yeah, I agree to everything you're saying? I want to get out of here, or did you say anything specific to them?
It was kind of a mixture. I mean, it wasn't super specific, but it wasn't as general as you asked. There was something in the middle. So again, I drew on information that they gave me in that interrogation in the 6 weeks. I said that I claimed that I was romantically interested in her, which I was not. I told them that that I had learned she was going to meet somebody in the park, so I went to the park, and I said that I told her, don't see this other guy, and that she told me, don't tell me what to do, and that I said I hit her, and then she turned and ran, and so
Wow.
and I said, look, because they had told me, well, look, it looks like there was an initial encounter in one place, and that there was another scene, a second place, and then in a third place was where the body was, so it looked like somebody dragged her there and they told me all of that, so I just weaved the yarn around that the best that I could.
You know what I think people don't understand is, you see, here you
No, no,
are, you're six, you're 16. It's very important to understand, because a lot of people say when they falsely confess that they just wanted to get it over with. They had to get out of there. Like, we would do a lot of things. We don't know what it's like to be to having such pressure from authority. And it's like, please take whatever you want, because at that moment you just want to be free. You want to break free from it. But also, you were only 16, and you were already playing a game with them. You were part of the police scenario, and you wanted to please them, and you wanted to make them happy, and you wanted them to like you, especially the good cop. And they were basically telling you, we can't like you unless you say A, B, and C. And you picked up on that, because they actually led you. It was breadcrumbs for the confession for you. And you just, survival instincts kicked in, even for a 16-year-old, and you said all that. Would you say that's a fair
Yes, I would. Yeah,
assessment?
that's a fair assessment. Yes. Yes.
And would you say that a lot of people who falsely confess, now that you're an experienced expert on this, do so because of the pressure, the stimulus, the being led to having words put in your mind, in your mouth, and wanting to get out of these extreme not being able to handle the pressure of the
Yeah.
situation and just wanting out?
Yes. Yes. All of that is true, with the additional thing that, police falsely telling the suspect that they can go home afterwards. That is
Right.
also a common characteristic,
Okay.
and that happened in the case also. And so after
Okay.
I confess, and I'm forced to repeat it, it's only at that point that I was given something to eat, because I hadn't eaten breakfast that morning, and and the cops didn't give me anything to eat from the morning when I arrived at the police station all the way up until around 5 o'clock. It was only after the false confession happened that I was given
That's part
something
of the
to eat.
stimuli. Keep you hungry, get your
Wear you down,
anxiety
wear
out.
you down. Yeah,
Wear
wear
you
you down.
down, right? And that's what, I've been involved with the trying to address corruption, fraud, and the biggest thing is, like, when there's a fraudulent investigation, there's no merit to it. People think, oh, what's the big deal? It's an investigation. It can wear your finances, your career, your family. The whole process is designed to wear you down. So it's not based on any truth. They don't care about the fact that they can't prove an outcome, but the whole process is to wear you down until you just give up. And that's part of corrupt scenarios to understand. So so here you are. You've confessed to something you did not do. Now what?
They finally gave me something to eat, and it was time to go back, and they rear cuffed me, and I asked, well, why are you putting me in handcuffs? You told me that I wasn't going to be arrested. And so they adjusted the handcuffs to the front. I mean, but the lieutenant just said to me, in explanation of that question, he just said, safety is what he said. And then
Mhm.
they drove me back to the police station, and they told me while we were in the car that that I was going to share some pizza with them at the police station. So we're in the police station, and I'm eating pizza, and periodically the good cop disappears, the lieutenant disappears, only the bad cop is still there, and I'm periodically interrupted by different uniformed officers who are carrying out different aspects of processing, and eventually it was time to take my fingerprints, and so they put ink on my fingers to do the fingerprints. And I remember getting very angry at that point, and I saw the bad cop that was there, and I said to him, you know now what's he doing? I mean, now I've got ink on my fingers. I'm over here trying to eat pizza. eh, and he replied, he has a right to do that. So I said, what do you mean he has a right to do that? This other officer told me I wasn't going to be arrested. And he said, no, you're being charged with the crime. And it was at that point that I realized that was what had happened.
And here was your mugshot at the time. Um, what the hell were you thinking? Here you are, you're 16 being charged,
I was kind of
standing
beside
there.
myself. Yeah, I was kind of beside myself. I really couldn't believe it.
It's incredible. Incredible. Did your mom know at this point that you're being charged?
They shortly after that she did. They called her. They asked me if I wanted them to call her, but I told them no, because I knew that my mother never wanted me to speak to them in the first place, but I didn't listen, and it turned into a disastrous result. So I told them no, but they called her anyway, and shortly after she arrived, I spoke with her briefly, and then I was then taken in a cop car to the county jail.
What happens next?
Well, I mean, jail was very frightening. I mean, it was a county jail for adults. I've been charged as an adult. I'm 16, but that's why I'm in, but I'm really afraid there. It feels like a strange, frightening world. And it was very frightening. And then, I'm there, and I quickly learned that, there's a vigilante mentality towards people, convicted, I've been charged with sex offenses. So it's pretty dangerous for me. I felt really depressed. I felt kind of suicidal, and so I spent most of the time in the county jail. I was held in the forensic unit, which is the mental health wing of the jail. So I was there for about 35 days, and then I got bailed out. My mother's then boyfriend at the time was a local businessman, and he bailed me out. And every time I went to court, just in terms of environment, it was a major media moment. It was all a guilt presumptive oriented perspective. And even when I got bailed out, that was a big media thing. And his business got hurt as a result of doing that. And when I got bailed out, I thought that I was going back to my old life, but there would never be going back to my old life. So I was not allowed to go back to school. I was a hated figure in Peekskill. And everybody in Peekskill and in Westchester in general, they
So
all
you were
thought that I
guilty
was
before
guilty.
proven innocent, right?
Right, right. And then because everybody hated me, nobody wanted to play with me. But even the few that might have wanted to, their parents weren't about to let that happen. And so I did make an additional suicide attempt, which resulted in my being involuntarily committed for 6 months in a mental institution. And
Can I ask
I
you what
was
was your attempt? What did you
yes, you
how did
can
you
ask.
try and kill yourself?
Yes, I opened the previously unopened bottle of extra strength Tylenol, and I literally took all of the pills, and I went to sleep, intending never to wake up again.
Hmm. Powerful. So what happened?
Well,
Who
I
saved you?
well I woke up shortly after that, and I couldn't stop myself from vomiting, and that woke my grandmother up, and I still couldn't stop vomiting. So I told her what happened, and then they called an ambulance, and they brought me to the medical hospital, and they pumped my stomach. And once I was healthy enough to leave the
Terrible.
hospital,
I'm so
which I
sorry.
was there for maybe 10 days, and then I was transferred to a psych ward. So I was there about 6 months.
Did you have any siblings?
I did. I had a brother who was 3.5 years younger than me.
Oh, this must have been so painful for your mom and your brother, your grandmother. I mean, just rips their guts out. And they never read you a Miranda warning or anything, huh?
Well, when I went to the police station the day of the false confession, when I was in the car with the good cop before he started driving, he read me the Miranda warnings. But the issue is that I
Well,
didn't
while you're
understand.
driving.
Well,
Yeah.
just before he started driving, but I didn't
Oh,
understand that I was 16 years old. And every time, like, for example, every time he read anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, my mind went to like a civil court. And I would think, court, what are you talking about? What court? We're not
right,
going to court. So I didn't
right,
understand. But then remember also, they're further obscuring the meaning of the Miranda warnings by this whole
right,
Jeff as a junior detective helper scheme.
right, right. Entrapment, that is something that a conviction based on entrapment may not even hold up, right? I mean, that's what they did to you. So it was an entrapment. It was like a grooming of getting you to confess so that they could solve this murder. And and all they did was basically, instead of investigating it and really rolling up their sleeves, they were grooming you to confess to something you didn't do. Awful.
Yeah.
So here we go. Now you are this is a picture. I'm going to just show a few pictures. One is this is you, um,
Yeah,
and
this is
you
me in the
are,
courtroom. This is me in the
yeah,
courtroom. I've been wrongfully convicted. So before the trial, to take a half step back, before the trial, a DNA test showed that semen found in the victim didn't match me. But instead of acknowledging they made the mistake, they continued prosecuting. They got the medical examiner to lie and to say 6 months after doing the autopsy, he claimed that he suddenly remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence, which he said showed the victim was promiscuous. Then he took it a step. So in order to wrongfully convict me, they were willing to trash her reputation. Her family was not coming to court, so they had no idea of what was being said about her in the courtroom. He took his lie a step further and mentioned another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim, but he never set the proper evidentiary foundation. So he never called him as a witness. He never got a DNA sample. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. My public defender essentially did not defend me. He never put my alibi witness on the stand. He never cross-examined the medical examiner who was committing this fraud. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me or used that to argue that it proved the confession was coerced and false. The judge, when I hadn't decided if I was going to have a bench trial or a jury trial, my lawyer came to me and said that the judge told him to pick a jury because he didn't want to be responsible for finding me not guilty. Then also he should have never represented me because of a conflict of interest, because this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of the public defender's office, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from asking him to give a sample. It prevented the defense from calling him as a witness.
There's so
Then
much to unpack regarding the details of how justice was subverted. We need a whole show just on that alone. We can go through your entire trial and show how people like you can easily be convicted and falsely imprisoned if you're not getting the proper protection that the law affords you, right?
that's exactly true. I just want to quickly
Right.
mention a couple of other factors that
Yes, please do.
that sure. So I didn't fully understand what was going on in the courtroom, and my lawyer refused to allow an adult to be involved in any of the conversations with me when it came to decisions like whether ultimately to have a bench trial or a jury trial, or whether to take the stand or not. So I was again cut off from anybody. And then lastly, the interrogation was not videotaped. It wasn't audio taped. There was no signed confession. It was just the cop's word for it. And when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of their testimony. And my lawyer wouldn't allow me to testify. So, when there's evidence of there's a confession is used and you're defending a case like that, you have to answer that confession. You have to explain that confession. You have to disprove that confession in as many ways as you can, and you bring it all together in your closing argument. But he didn't do any of that. Sometimes he was arguing to the jury that the confession never happened. At other times, he argued that it happened but was coerced. At still other times, he was arguing that it happened, but it was false. So by doing this scattershot approach, he had to have been standing there in front of the jury with no credibility at all whatsoever.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow.
But
And that is what you had to piece together after being in prison, after, because you didn't know any of this. You didn't know how to protect yourself. You didn't know all the things that were happening wrong. Nobody was giving you insight and saying, hey, you're not getting, properly represented. You're not having the protections of the law. You had no idea. So the case goes on. The jury doesn't know. No one's telling the jury what type of defense you should have, what rights you're entitled to. So is that correct? I mean, is that the way?
No, that's 100%. Right? No, that's 100%. That's 100% correct. Let me add a few things. He rarely met with me. Whenever he did meet with me, and I tried to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time, he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. And then there were a few major irregularities that went on in the trial also, as if all of this wasn't enough. So beyond the medical examiner's fraud, when the DNA didn't match me, suddenly the cops fabricated a statement and attributed it to me. They falsely claimed that I told them that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not, which that word was not in my vocabulary as a 16-year-old. And in their initial police reports about the confession, that statement is not there. They only came up with that statement after the DNA didn't match me. So they fabricated that to help the prosecutor try to get around the DNA. So there was that. Another thing was that even though—
hold on a second. Didn't they— hold on. She was raped by one person. They found DNA that wasn't hers in her.
Yes.
On her.
Yes.
And you didn't match that DNA. That sounds like a slam dunk, because somebody at that time, right?
Yes, you're right.
At that examination, they found the DNA. Did they investigate the DNA that they found, or were they trying to say she had boyfriends and it was someone else?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They tried to say that they tried to say that she was promiscuous in general, and then they mentioned somebody by name that they claimed slept with her, but they never had the DNA performed in order to prove that. They didn't even bother calling him as a witness. They just made the unsupported argument to the jury, which was improper, and my lawyer just sat there on his hands and let it all happen.
That is so unbelievable. Now, I mean, they have the DNA, they make up an entire fictitious, or even if it's true that she's promiscuous, it doesn't matter. They found DNA on her, and they never checked out whose DNA it was, right? And then they just basically dismiss it. Well, she was promiscuous. That is over the top, but I think it happens pretty regularly. Unfortunately, these type of crazy scenarios. We think we have the best justice system in the world. Well, it's completely broken, and that's not, doesn't say much about what's going on in the rest of the world. But America, you think that we had such a justice system that we can all rely on, that we could feel safe with, but obviously. People don't know what actually goes on in the courthouses on a day-to-day basis. So that, to me, that is just That just blows my mind because right then and there, before you went into jail, before anything else happened, your entire life could have been saved just from investigating that DNA. And it would be the DNA that saved you in the end, the very thing that they ignored. 16
Yes.
years later, it's going to save you and it's going to exonerate you, the very thing that they failed to address and ignored. So that's very powerful. Okay, so now here you are with your
Yeah.
aunt and your mom.
Yeah, this is when the jury, but again, there's just a couple of, I don't want to make a long time, but I just want to just mention a
Take your
couple of other
time.
things. Okay,
It's your story.
okay,
We want to know all of it.
okay. So another thing that happened though was that there was hair found on the body and around the body that was determined to be from Mongoloid and Negroid ethnicity, and obviously I'm white. Okay, so again, when the evidence doesn't match me, again, this prosecutor just resorts to arguing by inference. He claimed that the hairs must have been come from the medical examiner and his assistant. But again, he didn't do any type of test in order to try to prove it. He just made the unsupported argument. So there's that. And another thing is that even though polygraph testimony is not supposed to be allowed in the courtroom, this judge created this backdoor rule in which he allowed the polygraphist to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the test while prohibiting my lawyer from cross-examining him on the methods that he used to form that opinion. And another thing is that the victim's clothes, including her bra, was admitted into evidence. And that correlated to one of the statements in the false confession in which I said that I ripped her bra off. So the jury asked to see the bra. And we thought on the defense side that that was a bright spot because there's some bras that can't be ripped off of the body. So when they asked to see it, we thought that was good. Maybe they're going to look at this bra, realize that that's the case, and conclude that the confession is coerced and false, and therefore find me not guilty. And it was at that moment that the judge informed the court that the clothes had been left in the courtroom, out in the courtroom over the weekend, and that apparently the people who cleaned the court thought that it was garbage and they threw it out. And he refused to give a mistrial, and he substituted a photo, which he said that you could almost see the bra. He allowed that to substitute for the actual bra. And you add it all up, I was wrongfully convicted.
Wow.
And that's when that other photo that you were showing, that's when that comes out. You know, maybe you can go back to that photo
Yes,
in a second.
I will. But the thing is, I really think we need a show breaking down every single aspect of justice that you were denied to lead to this false conviction, because we need to hold prosecutors and judges and police and everybody in this field accountable, because they're the guardians at the door to ensure that truth is evidenced, you know, and if they are allowed to overstep law and your protections, then how can you trust that? You know, that's part of the reason I can't really defend the capital punishment, because I don't think we have a system that we can rely on. We just don't know who is getting a fair trial or not. We just don't know unless you delve into the trial and you see all the aspects. You know, I have questions over when someone is determined to be guilty and when someone is exonerated because of the politics, because of the lack of adherence to the Constitution, because of the lack of oversight. What say you?
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. Yeah, you know, there's been many people. I think the number is I think the number is 187 people that have been exonerated from death row.
No, but we do need a system that addresses criminality and that we can rely on, because we have to care about the victims as well. And you can't care about the victims if you're allowing the wrong people out and the wrong people in. And many of the people who are supposedly in positions of authority, maybe some of them, if they were examined, they should be sitting in jail. And we'll
I
get to
agree.
that.
I agree with you completely. You know,
Yeah.
at the sentencing, so I begged the judge to overturn the verdict because I'm innocent, and I referenced the DNA to support my contention. And he actually told me on the record, you know, he said, maybe you are innocent. And that doesn't lead him to exercise his discretion by overturning the verdict, which he could have done by reversing any number of rulings against me that he had made against me in the course of the trial, including that evidence issue that I mentioned. But instead, he took the easy way out, which was to give me a 15 to life sentence,
Right.
which I was then sent to a men's maximum security prison for.
And there's also funding, there's also statistics, there's also politicians saying that they, and people who want to get elected within certain areas, that they solved crimes, that they, there's a motivation for their careers, for expediency, and for all of that. So there's a lot of political motivation to not really waste too much time pursuing justice and just get a conviction. So here you are, right? What is this?
This is when the jury sent a note out to the judge telling them that they had reached a verdict, but prior to the verdict having been read. So I'm here praying. That's my aunt next to me. When they sent that note out, they at that time they had reporters and camera people inside the courtroom, and they all started taking pictures of me, and my aunt is trying to shield me from the pictures, and that's my mother next to me with the black hair.
And are you a religious? I mean, were you praying to God? Were you?
Yes, I was praying to God that I would be found not guilty, that this would go the right way.
Did you feel God let you down when you were found guilty?
I did.
Did you have a hard time connecting with God after that, with your spiritual beliefs?
I did.
Okay, so now you're found guilty. You're convicted of the murder.
The murder
right?
and rape. Yeah, the murder
and rape of your classmate.
Mhm.
And now you have to go to jail. Now you're 17, right?
Yes, correct.
And you're going to jail. So let's go there.
Right. Well, I remember the first day. I remember being in handcuffs and having a chain around my waist and having my legs fastened together and fastened to the legs of the prisoner on the bus next to me. I remember how large the prison wall loomed and how menacing the barbed wire appeared. And I don't mind sharing with you that, it was really frightening, but the wheels of the bus kept turning, bringing me closer and closer to, and eventually into the prison. I mean, it was very violent. It was very dangerous there. It was very violent. There were 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings every day. There was a lot of violence that didn't involve weapons. There was gang activity. The guards were verbally abusive as well. I had this bullseye on my back because I was been convicted of a sex offense. Not just if I'd have just been there for a murder, that would have been fine. But because there was a rape involved, so that over the years there were times where I was beat up, and one time I nearly lost my life as well. I had to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation.
Was there a way for you to commit suicide if you wanted to in jail?
Yeah, you could try to hang yourself, or some people would save up medication until they had enough and then just overdose with it. Yes, you could kill yourself in those ways.
What stopped you from killing yourself?
Because I was afraid that even that would go wrong, and that I would, continue to be wrongfully imprisoned. Only now, maybe I'm stuck in a wheelchair or my neck is broken.
So you're in this prison, and did you ever have a fist fight even before you went into prison? Did you know how to defend yourself?
Not really, no.
And So tell me how the guards treated you, how the food was, how it smelt, how, take us through. You were there
Mhm.
for how many years?
16.
16 years. Okay. Let's go.
So well, the guards were verbally abusive. I mean, not to me specifically, but to everybody. So I got what everybody else got. But then at times, though, the guards would I would hear reports that the guards were telling other prisoners about what I was incarcerated for. They were telling them what my charges were in the hopes that that would motivate them to assault me. The food was terrible. Sometimes it was burned. Sometimes it wasn't fully cooked. At still other times, there was, portion control problems. I mean, I remember the so-called Sunday dinner was a piece of cheese, two pieces of bologna, an old hot dog bun, a small bag of chips that was mostly air, and it was a soup that had contents that was making its fifth and final appearance that week on the menu. So the food was terrible
It'd be
on that.
interesting to do a budget check on all the funds, the doctors that work for prisons and everything. There's a lot of money there. But I don't think there's any oversight over the budgets, and there's no reason to be denied adequate nutrition to some degree. But okay, so the nutrition, obviously, there was no nutrition. The food was horrible. Um,
They had a
and
system of maintaining order in the prison known as keep block, which involved, sanctions being imposed on the prisoners if they were found guilty of breaking a prison rule. So they would keep you in the cell 23 hours a day. They would send you less food. Sometimes the food would be 3 or 4 days old. You could take 2 showers one week and three the next, rather than being able to shower daily as the rest of the population. You were not allowed to buy things at the store, and you could not use the phone. So in the course of my incarceration, when I would get beat up, because I would do the best that I could to try to fight back, to try to defend myself, then I was subjected to those sanctions because as far as the prison authorities were concerned, I was fighting.
And you were a young, handsome boy. I mean, putting you in the showers with these men who were hardened criminals. How'd you fend them off?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So, I mean, when I showered, there was some percentage of the population that showered completely naked, but then there was a larger percentage of people that, just showered. You keep your underwears on when you take a shower, and so I did that. That was, that, and then when
Yeah,
they were
but
whenever they were. Go ahead. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Could rapes go on? Could abuse, molestations go on, and the guards look the other way? Or
That could theoretically, yeah, that could happen. I mean, in the
have you
16
seen it
years.
happen?
Well, I heard of it happening once. In the 16 years I was there, I heard of it happening once.
So it's not the common occurrence that people say happens
No, it's not. No, maybe
in
it
your
used to be a long time ago.
experience.
In my
Right.
experience, no, no. But I do want to mention, though, since we're on this topic and it's related, that there was this one guard that he when he would do he worked at a post where it was his job when prisoners would walk through the metal detector. He was supposed to just decide which prisoners to search, whoever he deemed to be suspicious looking. And he used to pick me out, but he did it to everybody. But he used to pick me out. And when he would do the pat frisk, you're supposed to allow the prisoners to take things out of their pockets. But he wouldn't do that. He had this whole routine down pat in which he would go into your pockets with his hand repeatedly so that he could feel you up while he was doing that. And he had this whole routine where before it was said and done, he would grab everything like 5 or 6 times.
So basically, he was molesting you,
Yes,
and you were being violated regularly.
yes, but he was doing that to other people too, though.
Right.
And the other guards would see he was doing this in the open, and the other guards would see it, and they would look the other way. They wouldn't say or do anything about it, and
Right.
neither would the supervisors. And he was complained of many times, and
Right.
the administration looked the other way and just allowed it to keep going on.
Right. It's like when you complain against the judge or cops, they sort of protect each other instead of dealing with the issue and ensuring the integrity of their fields. And that really has hurt the court system. It's hurt the police. There's a lot of great police, but when somebody does something wrong, you should not just stand by and protect them. You should address it. Same thing with the guards. I heard, and I've seen pictures of people beaten brutally by the guards in jail. I'm surprised you didn't see more of that. I know people that they were abused, and guards looked away. So I guess in one fortunate aspect that you didn't see more of that. Maybe they knew you had parents and people visiting. They didn't want to, and you were a public figure in some ways, and they didn't want to mess with you in that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So in addition, I mean, in terms of how it smelled, I mean, it was a bunch of refiltered air. The air smelled stale.
Did it smell like urine when I went to visit?
To some extent.
Yeah. Yeah. And
but I used to go to the law I used to go to the law library and try to learn the law because I didn't trust the lawyer assigned to me to defend me anymore. So I went to the law library and try to learn the law and give suggestions, and I would collect articles about other people who were exonerated to keep going, using that as motivation. But I was also trying to learn, like, what route did they take and who helped them, and I developed this elaborate delusion when I would play sports, when I would play basketball or chess or ping pong, and I would pretend like if I was a professional player. But it wasn't like kids playing on the playground. I mean, this was that I needed to leave the prison for a couple of hours. So I came up with this delusion as a defense mechanism. I used to listen to sports radio, but it wasn't listening to sports radio. This was like a lifeline to the outside. And you try to normalize the madness. You use euphemisms. It's not the prison guards, it's the correction officers. It's not the prison warden, it's the superintendent. I'm not going to my prison assignment in the morning and the prison assignment at night. I'm going to school, or I'm going to work.
It's amazing what the mind does. And you're very intelligent and very creative. So your mind was just trying to deal with the pain and the circumstances and allow you to feel like there was hope. And that's what was happening.
Speaking of the hope, to build off that point, in my mind, I wasn't doing a 15 to life sentence. I thought that I was just doing a year or two until the next appeal, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I still believed in the system. And I rather naively thought that the higher up in the court system that you went, the more accurate it got. But as it turned
that's
out,
what people think. And I think the corruption comes from top down.
Right.
And I've learned that. And in my opinion, that's how it works. And that's how, even if you look up scholarly reports and articles about corruption, but they want you to think it's sporadic so that if one judge is exposed, you won't expose the whole system. So we're led to believe that. Yeah.
Sure. Just a couple of other quick factors as to how I survived as well. So there was another man there that also was innocent, and he had a very similar case to mine. And once every 6 weeks, we would get together in the yard, and half the conversation would be trying to keep each other going morale-wise, and the other half the time we would be brainstorming about what the next move was for us to be made. So I do want to mention that man, Frank Sterling. He was exonerated also by DNA a couple of years after I was. So there was him, but then also in what turned out to be in my last year, somebody responded to a ad I placed in a newspaper looking for a pen pal, and so he kind of showed up at the nick of time. I mean, I was openly asking him in my letters, do you think I should just give up? Do you think I should just kill myself and be done with it? I'm never going to get out of here. So all of those things in their totality allowed me to survive.
And what's interesting is everything happens, like I said, in increments. Like the whole thing that got you in the prison, all the missteps in the legal trial, everything is in increments. So you never see the end and never see where it's going to lead to. But when you know it's not being done right initially, you could pretty much figure out that now that it's not going to lead to anywhere good. And even being in prison for 16 years was incremental. You kept thinking, maybe I'll get out. Maybe somebody will help me, right? So you were trying to get help. You wanted your DNA, and DNA actually evidence was becoming very hot topic at that time, right? So take
Yeah,
us through that, your journey.
sure, sure. So I filed a direct appeal. It was filed for me. I had a different lawyer now, and this lawyer, I think, did a great job. So she argued that I was innocent based on the DNA that revolved around the legal arguments that there was legally insufficient evidence of guilt, that the prosecution hadn't proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, that the verdict was against the weight of the evidence. It was argued that my Fifth Amendment rights had been violated by the manner in which the police questioned me. It
Hey,
was
those were like, you know what? You brought me back to my DA days, because when I was in the appellate trial division, I used to get briefs like this. And the prosecutors were always fast to get a conviction, but we had to be the appellate division when we would get motions like that to deal with in federal court. We had to. Our goal was not to ensure the conviction stands, but rather was his rights protected? Did he have a fair trial? What was the weight of evidence? And so that gave me some hope in the legal field, because a lot of the prosecutors I work with, they were really concerned with justice, even if it meant that the conviction would be overturned.
right, but that wasn't what was going down in the Westchester District Attorney Office, unfortunately,
Right.
as my story will illustrate. So
That's right.
it was argued that my Sixth Amendment rights had been to confront witnesses against me had been violated by the judge allowing this polygraphist to keep telling the jury that I failed while blocking him being cross-examined on those methods. The judge being biased was an issue that was raised. Another issue was that the trial judge gave the jury the wrong definition of custody, which had to do with, as you know, how the confession is evaluated. So the definition he was supposed to read to the jury would be whether a reasonably prudent person, innocent of any crime, would believe that they were free to go. That's the legal definition of custody. And instead of that, the judge told the jury that custody was defined as if the police stopped me in the street with guns drawn, taking me against my will into the police station.
Well, that is very powerful. You said a few things. Cases can be derailed, justice can be subverted, depending on the instruction given by the judge to the jury, because the jury only has the instruction. Now, that makes a huge difference, because if your confession was done under a certain circumstances where another reasonable person, your age, your circumstances and everything, may have just said, I'm guilty, just to get out of that situation. Now they created a whole different scenario that didn't even apply to you, which would lead the jury to conclude that you were guilty. It was basically the question was phrased in a way that can only come out with one answer. That's outrageous. That's pretty amazing.
The issue of the evidence being the issue of the evidence being thrown out was another appeal issue, and another issue was the judge allowed the jury to visit the crime scene, even though at the time they visited the crime scene didn't look the same way that it did before. So that was an issue. And another issue was that the judge was biased against me. So in all told, this lawyer argued 10 issues. Then the prosecution, they went over the time limit for answering. And so the lawyer filed a preclusion motion to stop them from filing an answer, which, again, by appellate division rules, since you're late, that's supposed to be it. But of course, they ignored that and allowed an answer to be filed anyway. And then the reply brief to the opposition was filed by my lawyer. And when I got the appellate division decision, they said that I was not in custody, because I was free to come and go as I wanted. So they rejected that argument. They wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which is kind of a head scratcher in light of the DNA not matching me. And they knocked out every single other legal issue in one sentence. They wrote that they looked at my remaining contentions and found them either to be without merit or else not preserved for appellate review. And
I always thought that was like a
5-0.
A
Yeah.
form document. Yeah.
Yeah. It was. It's true. They ruled against me 5-0. And Susan, it was all downhill from there. If you think that was bad, it was all downhill from there. The re-argument motion was denied in one word, denied. The Court of
Right.
Appeals declined to give me permission to appeal to them.
Right.
I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure, which resulted in the brief being filed 4 days too late, which the then Westchester District Attorney, Janine Pirro, her office took the position that those 4 days were prejudicial to the people and that the court should simply rule that I was late. And that's what the court did. So now I was time barred and I was stuck arguing that this
Forget
procedure.
about the substance of whether you're innocent or guilty. It was a few days late. And so I thought Judge Sotomayor.
Yes, I'm coming to
Oh.
her. I'm coming to
Okay,
her now.
wait, I want to break down. I don't care that we went over because your story is very powerful and it's important that it all be heard. And what we're saying is the whole thing. People think they can go and have an appeal, and you can't really, because whatever happens with the trial court, if they screw up your case, the appellate division very rarely ever fixes it. And they rely on the record from the trial court and they assume all the facts are correct. And they never deal with all the issues you present. And then, yeah, they can give decisions like denied. Meanwhile, you're sitting there, your whole life is in jeopardy. And you're just another piece of paper. You're just another number. And people in the DA at the time could have helped you. She could have exonerated you. She could have dealt with the DNA, which her job was not to ensure the conviction stood. Her job as the DA, the prosecutor's role, is to ensure that justice is done for the state, not keeping an innocent man in jail. So you're saying Janine Pirro didn't do her job.
Yes, I'm saying that.
Right.
Yeah, I'm saying that. Yeah, I mean, look.
And because of her, you sat in jail. You're saying
yes, I did. I'm saying that too. Yeah, she became the district attorney before my first appeal was decided. So she kept the ball rolling against me. It was her office that fought me in 7 appeals. It was her office that blocked me from getting further DNA testing. It was her office.
Why would they do that when they could just do a DNA test? Why would they want to spend the people's money, keep litigation going when they could have just exonerated you on the DNA testing? What do you think the motivation was?
I think they just wanted to preserve the conviction. And I think that they were trying to protect their colleague who was still a prosecutor in that office and the police who,
and from being sued. They didn't want to get sued. They didn't care about your life. They didn't want to get sued and they didn't want to get exposed and lose their conviction status. Right. Okay. So that's horrible. So now, go ahead.
So now I appeal to the Federal Court of Appeals, where one of the judges is future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor and her colleague Rosemary Pooler. So my lawyer argued that, firstly, this was not a delay caused by me or my attorney, but by the misinformation by the court clerk, which seems very reasonable to anybody.
Clerical, right?
Yes. Secondly, she argued that allowing a ruling like that to stand would cause a miscarriage of justice to continue, which kind of links back to the DNA.
No brainer.
And the third thing is she argued that overturning the procedural ruling would open the door to more sophisticated DNA testing to happen. Okay.
Wow. Very reasonable. Who the heck can argue with that?
Janine Pirro's office did, and Judge Sotomayor upheld the lower court ruling. And then we moved to re-argue the case.
I wonder if it's correlated to how well they did politically and financially in their lives, and how well they addressed the court system, the litigants, and the people like you. So I wonder if they were playing politics with their roles, and that helped their meteoric rise within the system that's so politicized. And maybe if they would have done more of the right thing and follow the right rules, which is to preserve justice and worry about the person who may be guilty and do everything that they can for to rule on the merit of the case, maybe they wouldn't be where they are today.
Well, I believe that to be true because I know somebody that's 2 degrees removed from me, and he told me once that and they were trying. This was when they were trying to stop me from opposing her confirmation. It's one of the arguments that they told me was, well, she's going to be a great U.S. Supreme Court justice because she's been holding back on her rulings so that she has a chance to, move up. So
Yes, because the law firms have to approve her. Attorneys, millions of dollars have to get her on the bench. And do you know what I recently found out about the Supreme Court, which I was surprised, that there's absolutely no oversight. If you have information on a judge and you can't really complain, there's no oversight. It's like they're the kings and the queens in the Supreme Court. And nobody tracks their life, whether they're benefiting for their positions, whether they are amassing wealth or have connections. Nobody's tracking it. There's absolutely no oversight. It's quite amazing. And if you call the Supreme Court and you even want public information, they'll refer you to get a book for $515 written by an attorney. It's very, very disturbing, the facade of justice that we think we have in this country. And by the way, they're asking you, is this the same Jeanine Pirro who has her own show?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So my lawyer moved to re-argue the case in front of Judge Sotomayor, requesting that all the judges on the circuit hear the case and make a ruling. En banc is the legal term. And again, the re-argument motion was denied by Judge Sotomayor.
Can you say what en banc means for the audience?
Yeah, en banc means all the judges on the circuit. And so that was how strong my lawyer felt about that issue. And, the re-argument, Judge Sotomayor and her colleague, Judge Rosemary Pooler, denied the re-argument motion. And then I had no other court left but the U.S. Supreme Court, which agrees to hear only between 2 to 5% of the total number of cases that come in front of it. And they declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So that meant my appeals were exhausted. I was permanently locked out of the courthouse, and I no longer had an attorney. So when your appeals are exhausted, the only way back in would be if there's a retroactive change in the law, or if you can find some previously unknown evidence of innocence, which would have probably resulted in a different verdict. So I began this letter writing campaign for 4 years, looking for an attorney or an investigator to take my case for free because I didn't have any money to hire anybody. And I rarely got responses other than the occasional no. And then I went to the parole board, where because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility.
Another false confession they wanted, right?
They wanted another false confession, yeah. But unlike the first go round, now I was an adult and it wasn't going to happen. So I maintained my innocence, but then they denied me parole as well. That was an issue, and they cite nature of the crime, and they ordered me to appear in front of them 2 more years later. But what happened is that one of the letters that I wrote, which was,
and I just want to say on that note, that's not uncommon. A lot of people tell people, just take the plea. I know you didn't do it. And the plea itself is such a false situation because they'll make up a whole story. It has nothing to do with you. Like you walked the dog off the leash or you did something else that you never did. And they want you to plead guilty to that rather than the crime that they think you did. And people push that so that one is they find you guilty of something so that you don't sue them. They give you a fine. They get you out of court. They never dealt with the truth. They never allowed you your day in court or the process. And this is done regularly, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The 97 to 98% of all cases end in a guilty plea. And like you said, people pleading guilty to something.
Okay, keep going. I'm sorry. So now
So
you're on a search. You need something. You need to, again, we're back 16 years ago, the DNA could have been dealt with. 4 years ago, DNA could have been dealt with. Now you're still saying there's got to be some way. We have this DNA and I am innocent and this has got to mean something.
right, exactly right. So one of the letters that I wrote to a book author in care of the publishing company was instead forwarded to an investigator. And once I sent her the paperwork proving that the DNA didn't match me, she was instantly convinced of my innocence. I mean, she had never heard of a case where somebody was convicted even though the DNA didn't match them. So once she saw that, she became my champion, and so she she tried to get people to take my case, and when she gave me ideas, and one of her ideas was write the Innocence Project, which is a nonprofit organization in Manhattan that works to free wrongfully convicted people, where DNA can demonstrate innocence and in which no prior testing had been conducted. So my problem was that the DNA had been tested previously, and so you might say that I was excluded a little bit too quick for my own good. But the investigator, Claudia Whitman, told me that since the DNA data bank had been created, the prior rejection by the Innocence Project in taking my case, that was irrelevant, just apply again. So I wrote them and I filled out their application. She lobbied them from outside their organization to take the case. She got other respected legal entities to also lobby them. And then I got lucky that one of the intake workers there, Maggie Taylor, who was not a lawyer, when the lawyers again didn't want to take my case because of the pre-existing exclusion, she presented my case several times. She presented it a total of 3 times, eventually getting them to take it under the theory that the DNA data bank, uh, if it matched the actual perpetrator, that could be the something new. So getting their legal representation was the first key. The second key is that Pirro left office. And as I understand it, her successor, Janet DiFiore, DiFiore and Pirro did not like each other, and Pirro was in the middle of running for attorney general, and so it seems that I think that she allowed me to have the further testing, hoping that I'd be exonerated, so that it could be a damaging blow to her run for attorney general. So I got the DNA testing.
So again, you're caught up in the politics. Nobody actually cares about the law or what's true or the victim and who really killed her. You're again a product of the politics.
Yes. So I got their representation. Pirro left office. And the third thing is we got lucky that when we took the crime scene DNA evidence and entered it into the database, it matched the actual perpetrator whose DNA was in the database because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed his second victim 3.5 years later, who was a school teacher and had
Say
2
that
children.
again, slowly, because this is unbelievable. Say it again.
Yeah. We took the crime scene DNA evidence and we put it into the data bank, and we got lucky because it matched the actual perpetrator whose DNA was only in that data bank because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed a second victim 3.5 years later who was a school teacher and had 2 children.
So because no one did right by the justice system and by you the first time, you get incarcerated and nobody deals with the DNA. As a result, when Judge Pirro and Sotomayor didn't care about the DNA again and didn't care about the truth, as a result of all of these actions, there's another woman that is killed. And she would be alive today because her killer would have been in jail and you would have been out. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. That is true. So on September 22nd, 2006, my conviction was overturned and I was released, and I reported back to court November 2nd, 2006.
Hold on. Before you go there, I just want to ask you just a few things before we move on to your release. How important is the crime scene to be preserved?
Oh,
And
that's everything. That's everything.
it's absolutely everything in a case, isn't it? The crime scene. And
Yes, it
why
is.
is it everything?
Because that's where the evidence is going to be drawn from. If there's contamination or if it's not preserved, evidence is going to be lost, and people are going to, there's a good chance that the crime's not going to be solved. So somebody's going to get away with the crime. It's going to, that's going to be another person that's left loose to possibly strike again.
Right. And just the human side of things. As a young boy, you had holidays and you had birthdays and you were in jail. How'd that go?
Yeah, I didn't graduate high school. I missed the high school prom. I missed births, deaths, weddings. I mean, I was in prison from age 17 to 32. So those are the formative years, So I mean, when I missed all those holidays were very stressful. So was birthdays as well. And it's not simply the loss of freedom either. I'm in a living hell. I'm in a hellhole is what it amounts to. I'm lucky I didn't lose my mind. I'm lucky I wasn't killed. It's a miracle I'm home right now.
Yes, with your cat. I have 2 dogs. It's okay. So here you are. What's going
Yes.
on here?
So this is a press conference when I was released on September 22nd. It's my turn to speak. I'm not really prepared to speak, but
How old are you there?
I'm 32 years old.
Wait a second. You said September 22nd?
I did say that.
That's my birthday.
Well, in a very symbolic way, it's mine too.
Oh my God. So
my first words here at this press conference are, is this really happening?
wow.
I couldn't believe, I thought that I finally did it. I finally managed to lose my mind. And when I came back to, I'm going to be, in the bed in my cell, and I'm going to see the prison, the wall, prison walls in my cell and the cell bars. I'm going to, still be wrongfully imprisoned.
Right. Wow. And who's that guy? Who are the people next to you?
That's Barry Scheck to the left of me.
I know you look familiar, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he founded the Innocence Project along with Peter Neufeld.
Right.
That's my mother next to me.
Right.
And that's the other lady is Nina Morrison. That was my attorney at the Innocence Project.
Great.
And this is my mother hugging me just after I emerged.
How beautiful is that? Wow. So now you're free. What does it feel like?
It feels surreal. It was very overwhelming in many ways. I can describe it best when looking at this photograph. So this photograph was taken of me a couple of months after being released. And I remember everything coming together. So it was the psychological after effects. It is common to have post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, anxiety. I was released at 32. I felt like I was 17. I'm processing things at a slower speed. So I'm feeling the psychological after effects. I'm feeling a stigma. So I've been in prison for 16 years wrongfully, but I've been there for 16 years. So, people are skeptical, is it safe to be alone someplace with me? Speaking of alone, I'm like alone. I have no friends. I'm not, and I feel depressed. I was released with nothing. I was making money doing speaking engagements and writing a weekly column, but presentations aren't a consistent form of income, and the paper only wanted one article. The world is totally different. The technology is different. Internet, GPS, cell phones hadn't been invented. The culture is different, and cities and towns look different. So cumulatively, I feel like I'm in this parallel universe that I don't belong in. And so all of those things all came together in this photo where I'm on the phone with somebody and I'm just like totally overwhelmed and just breaking down and crying.
And who took that photo?
A photographer with the New York Times.
Wow. That's very powerful, that photo. That really does say it all. So how do you move on from this? From this photo, how did you get yourself back up? And you're so well composed and you've done so much since this photo. Take me through the days after this photo, the weeks and the months, and how you started to rebuild your life.
So so over the years, I mean, so for 6 years, I went 4 times a week to see mental health professionals. So that was part of it. Each day I tried to each day I tried to learn a little bit more about the technology, and the more I understood the technology, the more tied into the world that I felt. I was doing a lot of advocacy work, so I was speaking, writing articles. I was meeting regularly with elected officials, and I was also trading privacy for awareness. On these deficiencies that lead to wrongful conviction. So my point is that that was healing. That was cathartic. It gives me a sense of purpose and mission in the world. I have my release valve, so that's how I'm not angry. So that's part of it. Mercy College gave me a scholarship to complete the bachelor's degree because I had gotten the GED while I was in prison, and an associate's, and then another year towards the bachelor's, but then the funding was cut. So they allowed me to have scholarship. They allowed me to live on campus. So that's how I was a couple of weeks away from the homeless shelter. So I lived there for 6 months. Human Development Services of Westchester, they rented an apartment for me because I fit their mental health criteria. And so that was where I lived next. And so it was a very difficult 5 years. From the bachelor's degree, I then went and got a master's degree at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My thesis was written on wrongful conviction, cause, and reform. And after about 5 years, I got some compensation. But before I get to that part, I just want to share that it's hard enough to reintegrate back into society after you've been wrongfully imprisoned, but it was particularly difficult for me because I had been in prison from age 17 to 32. So I never before had to I never lived on my own. I never went shopping before. I didn't have a driver's license. I never wrote a check. I never had to balance a budget. So all of those things made it particularly difficult for me.
Okay, so that's very well said. My God, I feel like I'm there with you. It's just very, very powerful what you've endured, and that's why. So then you fought back and you said, "Hey," and you sued. Who did you
Yes.
sue, and how did that go?
Yeah. So I filed a lawsuit in the Court of Claims, and I also filed they settled. The Attorney General settled with me, and then I also had filed a 1983 federal civil rights lawsuit, and I had 5 defendants. So the first so one of the defendants was Westchester County, because it was their medical examiner that committed fraud, and they settled with me. Another defendant was Westchester County Legal Aid Society, and they settled with me. Another defendant was the Peekskill Police, because they coerced a false confession out of me and falsely attributed a statement to me, and they settled with me. I sued that
But
prison
hold on
guard.
one second.
Go ahead.
All these people settled with you, but it was the people's money that paid the bill. They had immunity personally, didn't they?
Well, they didn't have immunity because I could have sued them personally, which I did, but they never actually paid anything. When
Right.
people sue the cops plus the municipality and you style it, oh, I'm suing you personally, that's just for the optics. In
Right. You
reality,
named them in the
you have to
lawsuit.
you
Right.
name them in the lawsuit, but then
Right.
ultimately it's the municipality that pays for it, because if you
Right.
submitted that to the jury and they decided not to fault the entity that they worked for, but let's say if I had went to trial against the cops, if the jury had decided that it wasn't the city's fault at all, but just the cops personally, then the judgment wouldn't be worth the paper that it was written on, because they wouldn't have the money to satisfy that.
Well, not necessarily. Some of the people in those positions may have the money to satisfy it, but a lot of them never wind up paying at all. And the office that's supposed to discipline prosecutors who engage in misconduct, the disciplinary committees, they often do not. And yet those are the same offices that that there's evidence that people feel been weaponized, and it's been used to protect and target. Even now, what's going on with people who speak out against integrity issues, even within this election. So that's very disturbing that these very important offices, and I always said they were the most important offices, because if the oversight offices do their job, then people who abuse their power in positions of authority would be addressed, and we'd have a better system, and the people would be protected. But if compromised people are placed there, then they can use the office to target and to silence people who try and expose the system, and they can use it to protect misconduct and criminality, which what perpetuates lawlessness in our court system. So that's a very disturbing situation. But here you go, you went, you sued, and then there's someone else that you said you were.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But another defendant in the federal civil rights lawsuit was that prison guard that kept molesting me by filling me up over my clothes.
Good.
So he settled against me also. And then the last one was the polygraphist, who was from Putnam County. And I considered him to be the worst of the lot, because until he stepped in, the Peekskill police had been unable to get a confession from me. And if he hadn't gotten that confession, then the prosecutorial misconduct wouldn't have happened. The fraud by the medical examiner wouldn't have happened. And the deficient representation wouldn't have happened. So it was important for me to have a trial against him so that he could have his lawyer, I have mine. He'll take the stand, and we'll have somebody objective. We'll have a jury make a decision. And so I went to trial against him, and I won a civil judgment against him.
So like I say, everything happens incrementally. If this one didn't do that, and that one didn't do that, you wouldn't be where you were. And also the fact that these are all links in the chain of corruption, a corrupted corruption doesn't necessarily mean they were in collusion together, but they corrupted their jobs, they corrupted their responsibility, their duty to the people and the public. So, but it was such a system where who was running this system? Nobody seemed to really care. It's like so many of the people that were put in positions of power just didn't give a damn about what the truth was, how innocent or not innocent you were, and who the killer was, what the evidence was, what the crime scene was. I mean, I don't think we have to wonder why we're in such a bad position now with our court system. It didn't happen overnight. This system was in place for many, many years, and it didn't get corrected. So do you agree with that?
I do.
You do. So now you successfully sued, and
yeah, the one defendant that I did, the one defendant that I did not win against was the prosecutor. So as you know, prosecutors have immunity. So which means any misconduct that they engage in, it doesn't matter how egregious it is. If it happened after an arrest has been made, then they have immunity. So I did sue against him anyway. I tried to swim upstream, but that claim was dismissed. And the judge, in dismissing it, mentioned in his decision that he felt constrained by that law to do it, and that he wasn't dismissing it because he didn't find the allegation to be serious, or he wasn't dismissing it because I couldn't prove it.
Well, wait a second. First of all, they have quasi immunity. I don't think that judge did enough, and that judge had a responsibility to maybe refer that person for discipline. And the disciplinary committee, as I said just previously, had a responsibility to discipline the prosecutor, and she could have lost her law license and had other consequences. So there were many things they could have done. Even if the judge wrote that and it seemed very nice, he could have done a lot more. Just saying.
Well, when the dust cleared, and I circled back to my civil rights lawyer, and I said, the judge stated, what he did in dismissing against the prosecutor, but he stated that, that I may have another venue, another forum, and I said, I want to file a complaint against this prosecutor, and my lawyer told me that it would be a waste of time and money because nothing ever happens.
Exactly. So, but yet the same offices where nothing ever happens, when that's their job to discipline and hold the prosecutors accountable, and there have been Senate hearings regarding these offices that people have testified saying that these offices were used to protect criminality and criminal attorneys who acted unlawfully, and at the same time target attorneys or other people who expose the corruption. If that's not addressed, we have no court system, because those offices are paramount to ensuring a just court system. And if they're compromised, and there's evidence that they are, if they're compromised, then what happens is any criminal network can take place. And there's a lot of incentive, a lot of careers, billions of dollars in budgets, and each litigation has incentive and lots of ways to make money. And as we see, I think one of the ways to fix this system is to fix the oversight offices, but they seem untouchable to date. But imagine if they were run in accordance with the law, and lawyers and litigants and even well-meaning judges can go there and say, look, this is what's going on, address it. Then a lot of corruption that's happening, or misconduct or abuse of litigation that's happening, can be controlled and can be addressed. And so I think that's a very important aspect of our legal system that needs attention. What say you?
No, I agree completely. I mean, that's one of the measures that I advocate, for, just a commission on prosecutor conduct, independent people with subpoena power that have the expertise, needed, and, complaints could be filed anonymously. And because a lot of attorneys weren't willing to file complaints because they're worried about retribution against themselves and against their future clients. They say, well, then, future clients wouldn't get the same plea bargains extended to them if I'm representing them. So I do agree with you in that way. Mm-hmm.
Right. And also we need cameras in the courtroom, and we need a database regarding the courthouse, and that's for another show. But let's continue. We're almost finished with your journey, and the journey will continue after this, because you are doing so much good in the world. But so here's a great photo. You've sued them successfully, and you won basically a number of millions of dollars as a result, which doesn't go far when you created a foundation and you've lost so much of your life and you're trying to rebuild. So tell us.
So I took some of the money that I got. I took $1.5 million, and I started the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. It was intended to be a legacy for me, and it would do the same policy work that I was doing as an individual advocate, but it would also free people who are wrongfully imprisoned. So, since we opened our doors in 2011, and in that time we've been able to free 10 wrongfully convicted people. We've helped to pass 3 laws in New York. So videotaping interrogations, identification reform. So this is the second person that we exonerated in the red tie. That's William Hawley, who did 8 years and 4 months. Ironically, his wrongful conviction happened in Putnam County, which is where they brought me to. So that was actually an electrical fire, but that he was wrongfully convicted of an arson of. And the lady was the then staff attorney at the foundation, and the guy behind her is Paul Roncallo, and he was the arson expert. So we exonerated William Hawley. First person we exonerated was William Lopez, who did 23 and a half years in a shotgun murder in Brooklyn. He had pre-existing legal team that had been with him for 9 years, but we came in the case and we did some investigative work. So it's kind of like a building was built that was missing a section, and we filled it in. He was exonerated, but he passed away after a year and a half of being free. So they essentially stole all of his adult life from
Now,
him.
who are the people here surrounding you?
Yeah. So in the red tie is Fernando Bermudez, who did 18 years before he was exonerated in a Manhattan case. To my left is Jabbar Collins, who did 16 years. And you might recognize next to him Raymond Santana from the Central Park 5 case. And the other people in the picture were the initial set of board members of the organization when I started it. Yeah. So at some point, I'm going to come right to that. At some point, sitting in the front row of the courtroom wasn't enough for me. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table, and I wanted to be able to represent some of the clients and make some of the arguments. And so I made a foray into law school in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as an attorney. And so here is when I graduated Pace Law School, which was in White Plains, which was only 9.5 blocks away from where everything happened to me in the courtroom. And I'm now an attorney.
So tell us, what now, and how can people get in touch with you and help your organization and be part of your pursuit of justice?
So I have entered. So the foundation does have 10 active cases. I've entered a couple of those cases as co-counsel. So beyond that, we're also pursuing policy changes. So there's a number of, so we're pursuing policy changes in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. So in New York, we're again trying to. So I'm also an advisory board member of a coalition group called It Could Happen to You, which the foundation is part of. So we passed 3 laws there. We had the oversight for the prosecutors. We passed a tweak of that.
Hold on a second. Let's write this down now. You said if people want to get in touch with you.
Well, yeah. Well, they can go to my website, www.deskovic.org, and you can email me from the website. And I'm also on social media, so people could inbox me as well.
Hold on. How's that? Deskovic.org.
Yes,
that's how they can get in touch with you.
Yes, it is.
Great. And I thank you so much. You will be back. We have a lot of work to do, Jeffrey.
Sure, but I just wanted to mention how people could help the organization.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, okay. So we're pushing policy changes in 3 states. But in terms of how people can help us, so we want to increase our capacity. So we have 7 cases that are approved but are just sitting there that we don't have the capacity to move. So we want to have in-house staff again, and we want to be able to push policy in more than just the 3 states we're doing that. So I need people. My biggest challenge as someone who started a nonprofit, I need third parties who can serve as connectors, who can connect me to people who have capacity that this cause is likely to speak to. So that's one way people can assist. We definitely need we need donors, we need board members, and then if we can find celebrity spokesperson that would help us. And we have a crowdfunding page on Patreon, the website, which is for people who are willing to be recurring monthly donors. Can
you tell me the website? I'll put that up.
Yes, I will. I'll put it right through I'll put it in the chat in 1 second.
So
Sure. So the idea with the Patreon campaign is, what if there were 25,000 people that were willing to part with, $3 or $5 on a recurring monthly basis? I mean, they really wouldn't feel that, but over the course of a year, that would give us a really good budget so that we could hire the attorneys, investigators, paralegals, other, essential personnel that we need, and we would be able to expand our pushing policy in additional states. There's also what we call the Amazon Smile program, which is a program by which, if people registered for the organization on Amazon, then Amazon would donate a small portion of the purchase to the organization without it increasing the cost to the consumer.
Okay. So, great. So, do you want me to post the website?
I really would like you to post the
Yeah. Okay. Can
Patreon
you tell me
website,
the
as
other
well
website?
as the yeah. What's that?
Go ahead. Tell me Patreon. How do you spell that? P-A-T?
Yeah, I put the link in the chat. Could you see
No,
it
I
there?
don't see it.
Okay, so it's www.patreon Patreon
Yeah.
.com/Deskovic,
That's wonderful. I
and
like.
the Amazon Smile program is https colon front slash smile dot amazon dot com /ch /38 376 7350. Now, if you work at a corporation and they do corporate philanthropy, I would ask people to mention our organization name so it could be in consideration.
That's wonderful. I thank you so much, and you will be back, and our journey will continue because we have a lot of work to do, as I said. Is there anything else that you would like to say in closing?
Yeah, I would just say that, that this happened to me and that this could happen to you. It could happen to anybody. My case is not rare or unique. I mean, I'm just one of the lucky ones who made it out. Per the National Registry of Exonerations, which is the clearinghouse for exonerations, there have been 2,775 exonerations across the country from 1989 forward. So I
Wow.
just wanted to add that.
And are you practicing law now if people want to get in touch with you and they need your counsel?
I am practicing law now, but I'm only working on wrongful conviction cases.
Okay.
So I just wanted to,
So they can go to
mention
your
that.
website and get in touch with you.
They
Well,
can.
great. And let's continue the journey, and we'll talk about some maybe wrongful convictions or the processes. Would you
The
say that process?
deficiencies.
What?
Yeah, there's a lot of systemic deficiencies that lead to wrongful convictions, and I would love another
That's so well
episode
said.
where
Yeah.
we can get into that. And
Yes.
I'd love, and I just want to mention, this is about justice. This is about accuracy. It's not anti-cop or anti-prosecutor. It is against prosecutors and cops and judges and defense lawyers who don't do their job, who go outside of the rules and regulations, who run over state and federal constitutional rights. It is against them, but it's not against people in those professions doing their job the right way. And I have been able to get some buy-in from law enforcement. So the last 6 years, twice a year, I'm brought in to co-teach the ethics class to the police cadets. I've done continuing legal education presentations in front of groups of prosecutors and some district attorney offices. Now, I served on a transition committee for an incoming district attorney, helping to draft memos of best practices for the Conviction Integrity Unit. And I've also served on the Peekskill Police Task Force Reform Group, where the subcommittee I was on had a retired officer, the Peekskill Police Chief, and a county police officer. So my point in mentioning that is there is acceptance in some segments of law enforcement that this is about justice and accuracy. And I have presented 4 different times in front of groups of judges who asked me to address one wrongful conviction topic or another. So that does give me a little bit of hope. I think that we have a lot of work to do. It's definitely not a few bad apples. If that was the case, there wouldn't be such a prevalence of misconduct and wrongful conviction and brutality and unjustifiable deadly police force. So I don't believe that. But it's not everybody either. The truth is in the middle, and nobody suddenly becomes more moral or ethical just because they happen to enter into a certain profession. And I call on all of the morally solid people in those professions, you know, turn on the ones in your profession that are dirty, that do the wrong thing. Stop looking the other way. When you look the other way, then you become somebody you become a dirty cop. You become
We
a
need
dirty
to create
prosecutor.
a support system for them
Yes,
because
yes.
we need to create a system of oversight where they could be safe and not retaliated against, and then more people may come forward. And that's the problem with our oversight. So we have a lot to do, a lot to unpack. It was very well said. You are a great champion for justice, and we so appreciate you. And I can't wait to have you back. We're going to go through the systemic problems and how to improve our court system, our justice system, our police force, everything, because we're here. Judge Sandra Day O'Connor said it's a good thing to criticize the judiciary. It means you care, basically. And if you don't criticize constructively, then it doesn't get better. So that's what we're here for. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to hear from you, my audience, the people out there. Please get in touch with Jeffrey Deskovic. We all need to support his cause and and what he's gone through for justice and what he's trying to do for our system. Okay. Thank you very much. And hold on, Jeffrey. I'm going to end the broadcast now.